Hey everyone, today is Monday, October 12th, and here is today's Monday Morning Minute. So, first off, today I'd like to talk a little bit about that feedback form you all completed last week. And by the way, thank you so much for your candid thoughts and ideas. And then I want to touch on this week's readings, which are continuing within this meta theme of culturally responsive classroom management. What is this? What does it mean? What does it look like in practice, etc.? And then we will touch briefly on critical response number 4, which is coming up this week. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff on this slide, and I'm sorry that it's maybe strangely organized, but yeah, there was just a lot that I wanted to share with you all that came up in those responses. And it's so helpful as an educator just to get a sense of where you all are in terms of your thinking around this course and whether this course is working or not for you. And this just reminds me of how important a practice this is. So I would encourage you all to regularly ask your students for feedback as well. Okay, so some major themes that I wanted to share with you all. First of all, kind of more positive ones. It seems like people really like the way that the course is laid out, that it's relatively well organized, that you're able to find what you need to be successful, which is, my ultimate goal, and I'm so excited to hear that. And several of you mentioned these videos, these Monday Morning Minutes, as being helpful too, just as a way to lay out what's coming this week and make sure that, amid the millions of other things you got going on, that you know exactly what you're supposed to do for this course. So I'll keep up with these Monday Morning Minutes, and I'll strive, forever to make sure that this course is clearly organized for you all. And then in terms of things that we'd like to see changed, several of us mentioned that we actually wanted more synchronous sessions, more opportunities to just interact virtually at the same time. And I completely agree. I mean, I think it's so fun when I get to spend time with you all. And so some of us mentioned, even at the end of a very long day of Zooming, I still would prefer to hang out with people in this class a bit more. And then a couple of us mentioned that we wanted the opportunity to interact with people beyond our small groups in those critical response groups, those discussion boards on Blackboard. So I thought that was a really good idea too. Okay, so the bottom left here, this is really interesting. So I asked the question, if you recall, on that Google form, just about whether you think we have too many synchronous sessions, too few, or about the right amount. So the red here is about right. 44% of us think that the ratio of synchronous to asynchronous is about right. Awesome. The same percentage, 44.4, which I think translates to 4 people, the blue here are folks who would prefer actually more synchronous sessions, so more frequent all-class Zoom sessions. And we have one person who would actually prefer fewer synchronous sessions, so maybe more of an asynchronous approach. So, when you get this data as a teacher, you have to think, okay, so what do I do with it? We're about split. And so here's what I've done with it. And I'm excited to sort of roll out these changes to you all. I'm trying to kind of meet in the middle and make sure that everyone has their needs met. Okay, so first of all, for the remaining critical response forums, they're all whole class. So now when you go to that critical response groups tab within Blackboard, you're all in group 1 all of a sudden. And here, 13 is obviously large for a small group, but my thought is that you can purposefully and intentionally interact with some folks who you haven't interacted with on Blackboard within our course. And that might be, a little bit more freeing. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to make the rest of the course, the critical response forums, whole class. Secondly, I've added at least one. I'm looking at the dates, and I'm not sure we'll have another optional synchronous session, but I do want to roll out one additional optional synchronous session on October 21st. That'll be our normal class time at 4:15 p.m. And I envision this as just a 45-minute to 1 hour meeting for us, where we will discuss the readings. We'll have the opportunity for just plain discussion, dialogue, and it's an interesting reading too, so I'm super excited to hear what you all have to think. And to kind of sweeten the pot a little bit, we do that week have our 5th critical response scheduled. If you are able and willing to show up to this optional synchronous session and engage with us for that 45-minute to 1 hour period, you do not have to complete critical response number 5. Your participation in the synchronous session will count as your participation, or your completion rather, of critical response number 5. Again, it's still perfectly optional though, because that was, this is kind of a little bit beyond the contract that I laid out to you all at the start of the semester. So there again are the changes. And so the second reason why I wanted us to be in a whole class forum for those critical response groups is because I don't know how many people are going to show up on October 21st. It might be a lot, it might be not many at all. And in any case, I just wanted to make sure that if you're participating on Blackboard, that you've got some people to interact with. So, okay, please let me know if any of these changes are confusing. I'm happy to talk more about them. Okay, so this week, funds of knowledge. And I know this is a term that has already come up a lot in our course, and it seems like a concept that some of us are already familiar with from other classes, which is fantastic. I think it really spans curriculum and pedagogy, and certainly classroom management. And so I've changed up the readings a little bit, and I'm sure the eagle-eyed among you probably have noticed. Please know whenever I make these changes to readings, my thought is always to make things a little bit more palatable. I'm not really piling on. That's not my strategy for this semester. Instead, I'm trying to scale back. So in this case, I've added a new reading. It's really, it's a web page. It's actually from the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction for the state of Washington. So I think that adds kind of another layer of interest here. This is what, an official administrator within the state in which we are is talking about with regards to funds of knowledge, and hopefully that gives you a little more affirmation that your employers think that this is actually really important. So they go through the history of funds of knowledge. They have some really great examples of what this looks like in the classroom, and they define funds of knowledge very broadly, rather, not briefly necessarily, as encompassing many things, including your students' academic and personal background, and the background knowledge that comes with their own personal experiences. Secondly, accumulated life experiences, as well as skills and knowledge used to navigate social contexts, world views. The idea here with funds of knowledge is that these are all resources. These are all rich wells from which we can draw as educators in the service of ensuring that our students meet their academic goals, right? And they also include a really cool document. It's called the Funds of Knowledge Inventory Matrix, and we'll look at that and on the next slide. But briefly, what was originally slated for this week was an article by Gonzalez et al. And these are the folks who really popularized this idea of funds of knowledge within teaching and teacher education, I'd say. And this is another research article. It's a bit longer. I think it is really interesting. It's called Funds of Knowledge for Teaching in Latino Households. And it's a report, it's a research report on their work with a group of teachers who they trained sort of as anthropologists. And they did a bunch of house visits. And from this research, they gleaned that those teachers who participated with them, first of all, gained skills as qualitative researchers, and they talk about why teachers should see themselves as qualitative researchers. It's not necessarily a label that we always associate, but they think it's actually a really important one. They talk about how the teachers in their study formed really strong relationships with families, and, most winningly, these teacher participants came to view the households from which their students came as a wealth of resources for teaching. Okay, so again, that's an optional article this week. But back to this inventory matrix. I couldn't resist with this smiley face, apparently, this emoji. But okay, so this is also part of that, the web page that I'm asking you to check out. I just wanted to call a little bit more attention. So they actually have a downloadable file for this inventory matrix. And the idea here is to take what you know about students, ideally from the context of conversations with parents, perhaps home visits. And I know home visits are certainly not happening right now. But the idea is to get to know your students as deeply as possible and to think about what you observe and think about how those observations might help you incorporate their funds of knowledge into the classroom. So they give a ton of examples about Ruby, which is a pseudonym, who is a first grade multilingual student of one of the researchers. And so they kind of go through multiple different content areas, but here were a few that I thought were cool. So they talk about noting that there are a lot of maps around Ruby's home, and maybe we could draw on maps. Maybe we could move up a map unit or kind of explore it in more depth. They said, we could look at cities in Washington and take it a step farther. So there's kind of a cool example of like taking this fund of knowledge and applying it in the classroom. And then a second example I thought was really interesting was this idea of cooking. And so this person noticed that Ruby's mother was cooking a bunch. And I think Ruby is from El Salvador. And so they were making like some cool plátanos. And the idea here being in school, maybe we could work on some vocabulary. Maybe we could do some translational work with parents and recipes. Maybe we could also weave in some math, thinking about ratios and proportions. So again, like the idea here is like, what do we know about our students and how can we use that? How can we leverage this knowledge and these funds of knowledge to the betterment of their education? Okay, so thinking about this an inventory matrix, that's kind of where I'm coming from with this critical response number 4. And just as a reminder, that initial post, remember, is due Thursday. 2 follow-ups will be due on Sunday. And do your best to try to make those deadlines as much as possible, just so that everyone in your critical response group, I guess it's the whole class now, everyone's ideas can be responded to. That's the important point here. But for this week, first, I'd just love to know your thinking around this concept of funds of knowledge. How might you describe it or define it in your own words? Why is it important? Why are we talking about it in a teacher education class? And then secondly, I thought it would be really interesting if we tried to apply, even just slightly, this idea of funds of knowledge and the inventory matrix to our own field placements right now. So using that inventory matrix, I'd love for you to reflect on some potential funds of knowledge of maybe 1 or 2 students in your field placement currently, based on your observations of them. Now, this is going to be hard to do because so many of us are virtual. That said, I wonder if you've noticed anything, perhaps on the walls behind your students. Perhaps you've had some interactions with parents, caregivers, siblings that might help to kind of, fill in the boxes on that matrix. So if you are talking about students, please do use pseudonyms just to be sure, hashtag FERPA. But yeah, let's try to actually put this into practice. That's what I'm asking us to do. And then one more thing. Sorry, this is a super sized Monday morning minute for you all. Okay, I was looking at the calendar and again, like thinking about adding more synchronous sessions and this and that and looking at all that we have to accomplish in the last few weeks of the semester, which is flying by, my goodness. And I noticed that I had activities scheduled for the week of November 9th through the 15th. And I have been fretting all weekend about the ethics of asking you to complete work when, if we were in person, we would not have class that day because Veterans Day is on a Wednesday, November 11th. Yeah, this sounds so silly, but honestly, this took up so much time. And I was hemming and hawing and sending emails and just like, what should we do about this? And, given that it's the COVID semester and everything, and, my mantra is scaling back rather than piling on, it's like, maybe the ethical thing here is to cancel that class session. So we've canceled, there are no readings. There was also supposed to be a critical response number 7 that has been canceled. It's off the books. So we only have 6, which means we're halfway through at this point. And I just wanted to let you know that. I've updated the course calendar. I've updated those folders as well. Critical response number 7 has been taken away from the gradebook, but just wanted to announce that to you all formally. All right, everyone. Take care. Thank you for listening and have a great week.